Today we're going to be learning Sukkah Daf Chet. Today's daf is sponsored by Zev Felsen in memory of his grandmother, Shirley Felsen, Sarah Bat Ze'ev Cohen on her York site. She valued education, loved the land of Israel, never had the opportunity to learn Talmud, but enjoyed learning about Rambam at elder hostels. She would have enjoyed these shiurim if she could figure out what a podcast is. Okay, we are going to start our daf. We have an actually mathematically complicated daf today, so bear with us. If you learned Eruvin, and you'll remember we learned in Eruvin Ayin Vav Amud Bet, almost an identical sugya, at least for the beginning part. So let's go back, and at the end of Zayin Amud Bet, what we had, if you remember, Abai said that Rabbi Yoshi, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon, Rabban Gamliel, Beit Shammai, Rabbi Eliezer, Acherim, and Acherim, which is Rabbi Meir, all held the same thing. So what did they all hold? That a sukkah is a dirat keva. You need to have a permanent structure. When we ended, we said, what is Acherim's opinion? That sukkah asuyah keshovach is psula. Lefi she'en la zaviyot. Sukkah that's built like a dovecote is no good because it has no angles. Sounds like the issue is it's round. Now, some of the commentaries say no, it's really because it's so narrow, like a real dovecote is actually narrow when it's turned out the size. And that's the issue. Even though it says she'en la zaviyot, and the issue is the angles, but some people really say it's the how small it is, which would then explain that when Rabbi Yochanan now starts talking and he talks about a rounded sukkah, which is the next line, Amar Rabbi Yochanan sukkah suyah kivshan, if it's built like a furnace, which is much wider and shorter than a dovecote, which is tall and narrow, then we would say that Rabbi Yochanan isn't disagreeing because the dovecote has a different shape. And that's what one called it a dovecote, one called it a furnace. However, the simple reading is that Acherim, which is Rabbi Meir, holds that a round sukkah is no good because it has no angles. And Rabbi Yochanan, must hold by some other Tannaitic opinion, actually thinks that a round one is okay. Under certain, we're going to talk about what exact size does a round sukkah need to be. And that's what we're going to deal with today, Rabbi Yochanan's opinion. So whether or not he disagrees with Acherim, which is Rabbi Meir, or not, is unclear. To debate among the commentators. So now he says, needs to have 24 people sitting around. So then it's going to be ksheva. So now the Gemara wants to know, where did he get this 24 number from? Kiman, it must be Kirebi. Let's start with Rebbe versus Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel say 6 or 7 hands breadths. That's way smaller than 24 people around it. There's no way we would get to that number. So it must be he holds like Rebbe, who says must be that. But now let's do the calculation. Now you have to remember, their calculations are not exactly the way we would do calculation. And we're going to see that their calculations are actually somewhat incorrect at a certain point until they actually figure out and bring them correctly. So the reason why this sugya is so complicated is because it seems to me, my reading, the way I'm understanding it, I have to say it's quite complicated how to understand it. And the way I understood it when we explained it in Eruvin is that at a certain point they're going to make a miscalculation. And even later, the Gemara is going to say certain things are miscalculations, but they're going to make a sort of miscalculation and then sort of correct us. So let's read. So how much space, if there's 24 people, how much space does these persons take up? 1 cubit. If it has a diameter of 1, it's going to have a circumference of 3. So 1 pi, but 3 and not 3.14, etc. Right? They, in general, rounded things. So their calculations, we're going to assume right now that if the diameter is 1, their circumference is going to be 3. That's the formula. So now they say, which means if you want it to be 4, right now they're assuming it has to be 4 cubits by 4 cubits. So if you did it round, the diameter would be 4. The diameter is 4, multiply that by 3, bits trace our side. 12 would be sufficient. But the Gemara says, no, that's not actually right. Why? Now, assume we're now assuming, and this is the way the sugya worked in Eruvin also, that we want to fit the square inside the circle. So they say, if you want to fit the square inside the circle, you're going to need a larger diameter because, right, imagine, you have a square that's 4 by 4, and then you draw a circle around it. The diameter of that circle is going to be the diagonal. So the diameter of that circle will be the diagonal of that square, which won't, that will be the Pythagorean theory, which we're going to get to, but not yet. First, the Gemara, it's as if they don't really know yet about the Pythagorean theory. So they say, we're going to want to draw a circle around the square because we want the square to fit in. We want it to at least have the minimum size of red in the square. Therefore, draw a circle around it. Now, here comes the miscalculation. The Gemara assumes, right, what's the ratio of the circumference of the circle compared to the square inside it? Well, to do that, they actually do the reverse. They take what's the difference between the circumference of the circle that's inside the square. They give us something like a kind of area of the square, which makes it more complicated. But again, this is all kind of what we call miscalculation. The fact that we make so much sense shouldn't bother us so much because first of all, we reject this ultimately anyway, and it seems that there is a confidence. So they say like this: if we want to then jump this up more than 12, because we want to put the square inside the square, then let's figure it out. How much more is a square more than a circle? Even though we really want to find a circle more than a square. But a square we know is more than a circle. But you're basically doing, or the way I understand, I'm not saying the way I understand because I think there's different ways to do this. Let's take any formula that we know between a circle and a square. So what's the formula? The formula is that a square is bigger than a circle by a quarter. Okay? Again, whether we're talking area or circumference, I'm not so clear. Areas would be more likely, but perhaps they're also related. Since we know that a square is bigger than a circle by a quarter, then, yeah, there comes the tricky part. That maybe makes some sense, but these shits are static. So we started with 12. We thought the circle was 12 because we thought the diameter was 4. Now we need to jump it up. So if we're going to jump it up, what are we going to jump it up to? Oh, jump it up by a quarter because that's the ratio of circle to square. Maybe also square to circle, right? So let's just take that. And let's say 16. So we get up to 16. That only gets us to 16. In other words, yes, we want to get to 24. So we understand that 12 is not big enough. If we're not going to get up to 24, maximum, you know, that at the best, we'll jump it up by a quarter. 16. So they say, wait a minute. No. Here they correct us. That ratio of 3 to 4, basically, right? Now, how do we get, this is, the truth is, I guess it is circumference because their whole thing was that a circle is 1 tefach, right, of, or 1 amma, let's say, of diameter to 3 of circumference. And in square, it's 1 to 4 because each side is going to be 4. So the 3 to 4 ratio in circumference makes sense, and perimeter, circumference of the circle to perimeter of a square. So it's 1 to 4. But that's that's a circle that's inside a square. But if you have a square that's inside a circle by a tfei, it's going to be more than a quarter. Okay, because think about it. You have not only the square, but you have all these areas of the circle that are not inside the square, and that's going to actually come up to more. And that's because of Mishum Morsha de Karnata, because of all the corners of the square juts out into the corners, and around that, right around those corners, you need to round the circle. It's actually going to be bigger. Okay, now, question is how much bigger? And we're going to see this right now, because we're going to see that mathematically speaking, it is actually bigger, right? I don't know if you'd be convinced by just saying there's this Morsha de Karnata, these points of the square that jut out, and the circle has to go around that. And or include those in the circle, that's to be larger. But let's see it right now by using the Pythagorean theorem. And here we're going to get to that a circle that goes around a square is going to be bigger than the square, okay, the circumference of that. So now this, but still the problem is, okay, we're still not going to get to 24. So now they go and do the math. Here we get Pythagorean theorem. Every amma on the square is an amma and 2/5 on the alachson. This is the Pythagorean theory. Each side is 1, and the diagonal will be 1 and 2/5. So now, if we now finally figure out that if the square is inside the circle, then the diameter of the circle is, there's pictures in your Gemara, so hopefully you have this. You can also look at the pictures in that are on the site, the diagonal here is going to be what, right? If it's 1 and 2, if it's 4 amot, then it's going to be it'll be 1 second, right? It's 1. If we have, sorry, to be ribua, we're going to have 4 and my math for 1 second. We're going to have 4. It was 4 cubits, right? So 4 cubits times 1.25. We're going to end up with 6. I'm sorry, math in my head now. I didn't write it down. 1, and let me see if it says it here. Right, it's going to be 5 3/5. Okay, that's going to be, that's the ratio, 5 3/5. So if it's 5 3/5, we're going to multiply that now by 3. How much are we going to get to? 16 4/5, or 16.8. That's going to be, because remember, this is using it's not using real math, it's using their mathematical equation, which is whatever the diameter is, multiplied by 3, and you're going to get the area, you're going to get the circumference of that circle. So therefore, again, let's go. And therefore, which is 17 minus 1/5, which is 16.8, is going to be sufficient. So again, how do you get to 24? To which the Gemara answers, lo dak. They weren't careful about it. They rounded. Now, you might say, that's a little extreme. To round from 16.8 to 24 doesn't really make a lot of sense. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. When we say, oh, they're not so careful and they don't really count decimals, right? Porta, we're talking small differences. But tuva, miamrina, but we don't say large differences, no way. We don't, miamrina, low dak. We don't say that, oh, they weren't careful and they jumped from 16.8 to 24. No, still Rabbi Yochanan makes no sense. So they reject this entire line. Okay, this was all thinking, again, in very simple terms. What they basically wanted to say was, how did Rabbi Yochanan get to 24? Because we have to have ready 4 by 4 cubits. We have to fit those 4 by 4 cubits into a circle. Therefore, we're going to jump it up from, instead of 16, it's going to go to 24. But that doesn't make any sense, because instead of 16, it's going to go actually to 16.8. That's what's mathematically accurate. So this doesn't work. So let's try again. Different. Who's to say this was all based on, what did he say? He never said 24 cubits. He said 24 people. Who's to say 24 people fit into, each person fits into 1 amma? Maybe each person takes up less space. Maybe maybe every 3 people sits in 2 cubits of space, meaning 2/3 of the amount. If we take 24 and we do 2/3, we get to 16. Oh, that's already much closer to 16.8. So now we can try that low dak theory. But the Gemara says, wait a minute. So kama havalu, how much do we get to? Shivsa, 16. But anan shivsa nachikum shavina. No, but we said 16.8, not 16. So again, the Gemara says, low dak. They just weren't careful. But then the Gemara says, no, when we say they're not careful, they always, this is when you always round up, right? They round to be more stringent. They never round to be more lenient. We wouldn't round down from 16.8 to 16 and be more lenient and say you only need 16 when you really need 16.8. That makes no sense. Why would they round down and make it smaller and then you won't have the actual amount that you really need? Doesn't make that any sense. We don't say we're not careful when it comes to being more lenient. We would round down. No way. So a different type. We're now at answer number 3. Amalei Rav Asi the Ravash. Lo'olam gava ba'amtiyah. Back to thinking every person takes up an amma of space, which again is going to lead to the fact that we have 24 people around. Now, if you have 24 people and the circumference is 23, what's going to be your diameter according to their logic? Right, that it's 1/3, 8, because 24 divided by 3 is 8. So we're going to have an 8 amma diameter, which again doesn't make any sense why it would be so big. So now what do they say? Rabbi Yochanan mekom gavre lo kachashi. When he said, and his words were, if in its circumference you have a place to fit 24 people. He didn't mean in the sukkah. He meant put 24 people around the sukkah, which means that the circumference of the sukkah is actually going to be 2 cubits less. The diameter of the sukkah, is going to be 2 cubits less, because you're going to have person and person, right? They're all sitting around. We said if there's 24 people, the circumference of the outer circle around those people from the outside is going to be 24, which means the diameter will be 8. But now if each person takes up a cubit of space, and now we don't want to count the space where the 24 people are sitting. We're counting the space inside there. So each of those 2 people, right? Imagine at every point in the circle, if you get rid of the people, you cut out 2 cubits. In which case, how long is your diameter? 6. 6 times 3 is how much? 18. Okay, so now they say, but now, so Makom Gavri Lo Kachashi. Maybe he meant, and therefore, Kama Habulahu, Timnesre. We assumed we were starting off with 24, and that was the number of the circumference. Now we're going to end up with a circumference of 18, because again, the diameter is only 6 because we got rid of 2 people. Diameter 6, the circumference is 18. That already is much closer to 16.8. But still they say, no, the shifts are not Nechichom Shasagi. But why would you say 18 if it's really 16.8? To which the Gemara says, Hainu de lo dak ulechumra lo dak. Now we're going to say, they weren't careful. They rounded up from 16.8 to 18, and that's okay because rounding up is being more stringent. We need this sukkah to be a minimum of 18 circumference, even though really it only needs 16.8, but they rounded it up, and there's your answer. Okay, so we finally got to a good answer. The Gemara is now going to bring another possible answer and then reject it and say this is totally off base in terms of mathematically, it doesn't work out at all. So Rabbanan de Kesari, the rabbis of Kesari, which is probably Kesaria, the Amre le Dayane de Kesari, some people say it's the judges of Kesaria. Amre, they said the following. Igula de Nafik Migo Ribua, Riva. Okay, a circle that is inside a square is a quarter, right? We know that, right? The circle we already said is a quarter of the space, right? The circumference is a quarter of the square. That's what the rabbis had said, because again, 1 amma is the diameter that will make the circle times 3, and the circumference, and the square with that length will be times 4. And ribua de nafit migo igula palga. If you have a square, just 1 second. I think I said it wrong here. 1 second. Here we're talking about igula de nafit. 1 second. Maybe I said it wrong. No, that was right. Okay. So that's a quarter less than the square outside of it. And ribua de nafit migo igula is palga. If you have a square now inside that inner circle, it will be half, the perimeter of that will be half the size of the perimeter of the outer square. Okay, so now how does this work and how does this help us? If they're right about this formula, then it works perfectly. Because why? What did we say? We want to have the circle is going to be, 1 second, let me get it all straight. The circle is going to be 24. That's what Rabbi Yochanan said. We're back to the original. If the circle is 24 and a square inside the circle is a quarter less, that's 16. That's perfect, right? Because what did we say? We want to have, I'm sorry, I said it wrong. It's a quarter more. The one outside is a quarter more. So if the the circle is 24 circumference, the outer one is going to be a quarter more than that. So a quarter more is 32. And the inner square, a square drawn inside that circle, will be a perimeter of 16. That's perfect. That's exactly what we want, because Rebbe had 4 by 4 amod, which, right, 4 times 4 is basically 16. You're going to have the perimeter of that square will be 16, which means that the circle will be a third more, which is 24. The square outside, that will be 32. It's perfect. It matches mamash, exactly what we're looking for. What's the problem? The rabbis say, Velohi, to lo kachazinan, to lo have kulehai. We see that that's totally not the case. Okay, and how do we see it's not the case? It's exactly what we just showed before. If you have a square that's 4 by 4 cubits, 16 perimeter, what's going to be the perimeter, the circumference of the circle around it, based on the Pythagorean theory, and the diameter then times 3 is going to be 16.8. So it's definitely not 24, and therefore this just isn't true. So they used the formula of the Rabbanit of Kesari to prove it, but the formula they said is actually incorrect. So again, we have these incorrect formulas. You learn a lot about mathematics in those days and how incorrect they were, and also how much they rounded and didn't take mathematics as exacting as we do now. And plus, they were off about certain things. Okay, continuing on now with the next sukkah. Amar Rabbi Levi Mishum Rabbi Meir. Shtei sukkot shel yotzlim zo lefnim mizo. You now have these two sukkot of yotzlim. What is a sukkah of yotzlim? A sukkah of yotzlim is if I'm a handyman or really a craftsman, okay, a craftsmaker. The way they often live, particularly they say in the summer months, they would have a hut in the inner. They would have an inner hut where they would live, and an outer area where they would make their whatever they were making, their utensils that they were building, and then they would sell them in that area. So the inner space was used generally as their home, and the outer space was used more as a temporary place where they would sell their stuff and work. So therefore, Rabbi Levi says, Mishum Rabbi Meir, if you have two sukkot of yotzlim zo lefnim mizo, you have this inner one and then the outer one, hapnimit ena sukkah, you can't use that inner one as a sukkah. Because why? You can't use your house as a sukkah. The sukkah has to be built. Now, there's a bit of an issue here. The sukkah has to be somewhat built to be a sukkah. Now, it's true you could, according to Beit Hillel, you could really take something that was already built and use it as your sukkah, but it has to have something sukkah related to it. It has to be something of a temporary nature, not something that was actually your home. So therefore, the pnimit doesn't work, and it's chayev b'mezuzah because it's actually a house. It has laws like a house. You have to put a mezuzah up. The outer one is actually can be used as a sukkah, even though you built it not for a sukkah. But since you don't live there during the year, if you live there, this is the issue with Beit Hillel. They say you could take something that's already built, but it has to be noticeable that you're using it for sukkah. Now, if I stay in the same place I live all year long or all the summer months, it doesn't look like I'm sleeping there or sleeping there for the purposes of the holiday of Sukkot. But if I sleep in the area and eat in the area where I normally work or sell my wares, then I can use it as a sukkah. And it's turam and a mezuzah because it's not a living space. V'amai. Now they say, wait, but this doesn't really work. Tahavi chitzona kebeit shal hapnimit v'titchayev b'mezuzah mishum delo kvia. Oh, sorry, v'titchayev b'mezuzah, period. So now they say, wait a minute. But the outer one should have the laws of a gatehouse because that's really like what it is. It's a house that's serving the inner house to a certain extent. It's like a gatehouse, and a gatehouse is actually obligated in mezuzah. So what are the answer? The answer is, that's why I read too far. The answer is mishum de lo kvia. Okay, what does that mean? Now, according to Rashi, there's actually a debate. Which one's lo kvia? Lo kvia means, right, like dirat keva, it's not permanent. What's not permanent? Either the outer place is not a permanent place, and therefore it can't be considered a gatehouse. Or more likely, Rashi says, it's the inner house that's not permanent enough. Because it's not permanent enough, and if I have a permanent house, then my gatehouse will be obligated in mezuzah because it's serving the permanent house. If my inner house is not very permanent here, then my beit shar is not really a beit shar that will be obligated in mezuzah. So it's true it's permanent enough that the inner house needs a mezuzah, but not enough to make the gatehouse required to put up the mezuzah. Tanu Rabbanit. Now we're moving on to another type. We're going to have Rashi Tevot. This is an abbreviation, an acronym for four types of sukkahs. Ganbach. Okay, what is ganbach? Sukkat goyim. Okay, a sukkah that a goy put together, which obviously wasn't for the purposes of sukkah. Sukkat nashim. Women aren't obligated in sukkah, so if they made a sukkah, it's called sukkat nashim. Sukkat behema, a sukkah that was made, and they say sukkat nashim. I think Rashi says it maybe, or no. I saw a commentary that it was made for women to weave in. That was where they did their weaving. They put up a booth, a temporary booth for them to do their weaving. Kind of similar to the Sukkot Yitzlim. Sukkat Behema, one that was made for animals, and Sukkat Kuti, made for also, right, generally they were considered Gentiles or Jews who had converted, but they didn't exactly have the status of a convert. They were suspect that they didn't really convert for the right reasons. And obviously this seems to put them in the category of not so Jewish as opposed to right? Other sugyo where sometimes we see kutim are considered Jews. Sukami komakom, and any kind of other type of booth, kshera, these are all permitted. In other words, if you have some temporary place that was used either for goyim, it was built for them, or it was built, right, Gentiles, or it was built for women, or it was built for animals, or it was built for these kutim, or any other kind of temporary booth can be used for sukkah under one condition. It needs to have schach that's halachic schach. Okay, what does this mean? It means that the covering has to be there for the purposes of shade, rather than what is the alternative? For smiyut reasons, for privacy. If you built this sukkah for privacy reasons and not for protecting from the sun, that can't be used for a sukkah. Sukkah has to be defined as something that could be used for a sukkah, that the sukkah is meant for sale. We saw that from the psukim. The sukkah is for sale, it's for shade. We have the whole thing that if the sun comes more than the shade, it's a problem. That we need the schach to be there for the purposes of shade. So if these are done with the explicit purpose that we're covering them for the purposes of shade, then it can be used for Sukkot, for the holiday of Sukkot to fulfill your mitzvah. But if not, if it was done just for a privacy reason, then you can't use it. So now they want to know what's this, or any other type of booth? What does that come to include? So they say sukat rakbash. What's rakbash? Let's see. Titanu Rabbanan, as it says in a Braita, sukat rakbash, which is again an acronym. Sukat ro'im, something built for those people who the shepherds. Sukat kayatzim, the people who pick the figs. Sukat borganim, okay, those are the people who. What's the definition? The guards, okay, the guards of the city, and Sukkot Shomrei Peirot, and the people who watch the fruits. So these are for Jews who are building these huts, not for the purposes of the holiday of Sukkah, but for a temporary place for them while they're shepherding, while they're doing their shepherd work, while they're picking the fruits, while they're watching the fruits, while they're watching the city, okay, some sort of temporary place. And Sukkah Mikol Makom Kshira, and any of these other Sukkot are permitted. This is a very parallel. So yeah, it's just this Braita starts with Rakbash and then says, and anything else. And the other one started with Ganbach and said anything else. So when they said anything else in the first one, it meant Rakbash. When Rakbash says, now we're going to say, so Michael Chata, the Gemara continues and says, what does it mean as long as it's on Kapcha? Right, as long as you did it for shade. And then they're going to ask the same question. So in the Rakbash Braita, what did it mean in any other kind of sukkah? They say, sukkah gambach. It's to include the gambach. So each one started with one and then included the other. So now they say, why did one start with gambach and then say, and anything else which included rakbash? And why did the other one start with rakbash and say, and it also includes gambach? So Haitana de gambach, the one who started with gambach, says, alima le gambach mishum dekviyeh. That's much stronger gambach because they're permanent, right? These are sukkot that are people use all year round, as opposed to the ro'im. The shepherds only use it when they're out grazing, and the shomrei sadot only use it in the months where they're watching the fruits, and all of that is somewhat temporary. Whereas for the goyim, for the kutim, for the nashim, for the women, for the behemot, that could be used all year round. So therefore, they took the one that was stronger because they're more permanent. And of course, it's going to include all those other ones which are much more temporary. Those were built for people who actually are obligated in the mitzvah of Sukkah. So those are stronger because they're built for Jewish men, as opposed to right, the ganbach, which are all people who are not obligated in the mitzvah of Sukkah. We'll get later to why women are excluded from the mitzvah of Sukkah. But and then they said and any other kind of sukkah, which includes gambach, which is even people who aren't obligated in sukkah, their sukkah could still be used by people who are obligated to fulfill the mitzvah. Here we'll finish our daf today, and we will start with the new Mishnah tomorrow. Have a great day, everyone.